Is it darker?
It's down.
It's down, maybe.
I usually have it up. Yeah. My hair is unruly. Good evening. I am the committee chair, Stephanie Hill, and on behalf of committee members and staff, I would like to welcome you to the February 26, 2025 City of Roseville Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee meeting. This five-member committee is charged with the annual review and report to the City Council on the revenue and expenditures of funds from the General Transactions and Use Tax, known as Measure B, that was passed by voters on November 6, 2018. I will now call the meeting to order. Please call roll.
Chair Hill,
Here.
Committee Member Betancourt, Committee Member Bunnell. Sorry if I said that wrong. Committee Member Kitchell.
Here.
And Committee Member Spate. All members are present.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As part of the agenda, public comment is for anyone who would like to address the committee on any item not listed on tonight's agenda. The Brown Act does not permit action on items discussed during public comment. When addressing the committee, please stand at the podium, state your name for the record, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Is there any public comment at this time? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and move on to item 5, approval of minutes. This item is approval of the minutes of the April 10th, 2024 meeting of the Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee. Are there any comments from the committee? Are there any public comments? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Committee Member Betancourt, seconded by Committee Member Kitchell to approve the minutes of the April 10th, 2024 meeting of the Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes. So the next motion is an action motion. So staff recommends the Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee take action to appoint a chair and vice chair for the committee to serve until December 31st, 2025. Attorney Joe?
Thanks. I'm going to go ahead and help out with the selection on this one. Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Mandel from the City Attorney's Office. We are going to select a chair and a vice chair for the Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee. Pursuant to our city boards and commissions administrative standards, we select a new chair and vice chair every calendar year. And so with this being our first meeting, we're going to go ahead and pick a chair and a chair. So some of the rules around this are, as long as you're on the commission, you can be chair or vice chair. We'll take them one at a time. We'll do a who wants to be chair, sort of by a show of hands. You're welcome to nominate someone if you want to nominate anyone else to be chair. And so once we have a chair or multiple people selected to be the chair, we'll do a vote, or just go straight into someone making a motion and then seconding a motion for someone to be chair. And then we will move into the vice chair selection. So if anybody has any questions about selection procedures, I'm happy to answer them, but I can kind of walk us through everything now.
Are there any comments or questions from the committee? Are there any public comments on this item? Back to you, Attorney Joe.
All right, wonderful. Okay, so for the position of chair for Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee, does anybody have an interest by show of hands in being the chair or wanting to nominate someone else? You can be chair again, too.
I'm happy to be, but I won't be in here in March, so I feel like that's not the best decision. So, anybody else? I'm going to nominate one of you.
Sure.
Great. Perfect. So it looks like Joe Bunnell has.
Okay, so we have a nomination for Commissioner Bunnell to be chair. Anyone else want to make a nomination? Okay. Does anyone want to make a motion to appoint Commissioner Bunnell as the chair for the Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee? And I'm going to make a comment that the chair is not supposed to make a motion. So can one of you make a motion to appoint Commissioner Bunnell as the chair?
I make a motion to appoint
you.
Commissioner Bunnell
Perfect.
as the chair.
Thank you.
Second?
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second, and so all of those in favor of appointing Commissioner Bunnell as the chair, please say aye.
Aye.
My notes say it has to be a roll call vote.
It can be,
Is that
yeah,
true?
we'll do roll call, I'm sorry. Please do a roll call.
Committee Member Betancourt?
Aye.
Committee Member Bunnell? Oh, no, but can you vote for yourself? No. Committee Member, Chair Hill,
Yes.
and then Committee Member Kitchell. There's one more. Committee Member Spate.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Wonderful. Okay, motion passes, so congratulations, new Chair Bunnell. Now we will move on to the Vice Chair. So are there any of you that are interested in being the Vice Chair or wanting to nominate anyone to be the Vice Chair for the next calendar year?
If no one wants to, I'll do that. I mean,
Okay.
you sure you don't want to? It's okay. I've
Okay.
been, you've done enough. Okay. Okay then.
We have interest from Committee Member Hill. So does anyone want to make a motion to appoint Committee Member Hill as the Vice Chair of the Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee? Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Motion was made by Commissioner Betancourt, seconded by Commissioner Bunnell. Let's please do a roll call vote on this.
Committee Member Betancourt?
Aye.
Chair Bunnell?
Aye.
Committee Member Hill?
Yes.
Committee Member Kitchell?
Yes.
Committee Member Spate.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Wonderful. All right, congratulations.
I am now going to turn the meeting over to Chair Bunnell,
Condolences.
and I'm going to give him my notes because I don't think he has any.
I'll see.
So you're gonna read ones in black. Presentation black.
You can even switch chairs if you want to make it
Yeah,
real,
you
real
want to?
formal. Yeah.
I mean, sure. I got matter to me.
You might as well get used to this chair.
Is it any different?
It's Doug Funner.
Does it feel okay? Yeah, that's true. That's true. Name plaques.
I don't know who you
More
are.
visible to everybody from there. Thank you.
Oh. I got it.
Next to him so I can help you. I'm going to sit here for a few minutes just so he makes sure he understands.
All right. For item 6.2, we have the Brown Act presentation by Joe Mandel, Senior Deputy City Attorney on the Brown Act. For more information.
Thank you, Chair Bunnell. We are actually going to have a PowerPoint presentation up for this one, and I want to double check. Oh, wonderful. Look at that. Magic. All right, great. For item 6.2, I'm going to give a presentation on the Brown Act. Again, my name is Joe Mandel from the City Attorney's Office, and all of you are the same committee members as last year, and so I gave this presentation last year as an overview and wanted to just sort of do a refresher for everybody so that we'd all have it in the forefront of our minds about the Brown Act and the California Public Records Act. So with that, I will get started. So real quick, the Brown Act it's named after the author of the bill, Ralph M. Brown, and it's part of a bunch of what are called sunshine laws from about 50 years ago, and the idea was make legislative bodies meet in the public. So the public has the right to know what actions its elected and appointed officials are taking. The public has the right to attend meetings. The public has the right to participate in meetings. And legislative bodies should not meet in the open, should meet in the open and not secretly. So that's the general overall purpose of the Brown Act. And so some of the rules that apply associated with the Brown Act, who does the Brown Act apply to? Brown Act applies to all legislative bodies of a local agency, and the two bullet points, the second and the third bullet point, apply to the Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee. We're a subsidiary body that was created by formal action. When the voters approved Measure B, the sales tax increase, City Council created this body as an oversight committee to review those expenditures. So we are subject to the Brown Act because of that, as well as the third bullet, which is we are a standing committee with continuing subject matter jurisdiction. So because we do those, the Brown Act applies to us. So since the Brown Act applies, what do we have to do? There are two real important things that we need to do before the meeting. So before holding a public meeting, we need to provide notice to the public that we are going to meet. And so if it's a regular meeting, we need to post that notice 72 hours in advance in a publicly accessible place. We post agendas online, we post them here at the Civic Center, we post them at the libraries, so those are our publicly accessible places. If we're going to meet for a special meeting, notice needs to be posted at least 24 hours in advance, and that's a pretty rare thing for us to do, so most notices will be out 72 hours in advance. And the meeting needs to be held in the city, but that's a little bit different sometimes after COVID and now how we're able to meet via Teams. So again, we need to provide notice to the public, and then the other thing is that we need to provide the public with an agenda. And the agenda is generally all of the items listed on the agenda and a brief general description of each item to be transacted. We need to provide an opportunity for public comment on those items. We can't prevent or prohibit criticism on anything. Public comment is public comment. And no action or discussion can take place on any item that is not on the agenda. So that's one of the important things as well about the Brown Act is provide notice and an agenda, and that's all we're allowed to talk about at the meeting. So getting to that concept of what is a meeting, there is a very specific definition as to what is a meeting under the Brown Act. And so this is the definition of it, and I'm going to highlight a couple of key words in here, and that a meeting is defined as a congregation of a majority of the members at the same time and location where they're going to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item. So again, we're looking at a majority of the committee together at the same time and place. So since we're a small committee of 5 people, that really is only 3 of us. And so we could see, Roseville's a small place. We could potentially be meeting at the same time and place. So we need to make sure we're not discussing any matters, not hearing, discussing, deliberating, or taking any action on anything that this board would normally talk about in their subject matter jurisdiction. The next concept I want to talk about is something called a seriatim meeting. And really the idea of this is, again, we're not supposed to have a majority of people discussing any of the committee's business. But what if one of you talks about it with another one? So kind of the idea is you're not supposed to have a series of communications of any kind where you're discussing or deliberating or taking any action. So we're not supposed to have committee member 1 talking to committee member 2, talking to committee member 3, and sort of even though a majority didn't get together, we know everybody's position and how they feel about everything. So we're not supposed to do those, not supposed to do chain of communication. That's what some of these examples are. The first bullet point, chain of communications, again, member A communicates with member B then communicates with member C. The other concept is when we call it the hub of the wheel, where one committee member goes around and talks to all of the other committee members so they know what everyone's opinions and thoughts are. All of that is supposed to take place at the public meeting. So to the extent we have all of these conversations in public, we should be doing that. Sometimes it makes it awkward, but that's okay. A little bit of caution, because this is something that's kind of new since 2020 and relates to social media posts. Normally, a single contact between one member that's a public official and another member, if one of you were to send something to the other on social media, that's not a majority of the members meeting. But what AB 992 did when they passed it in 2020 was it was specifically intended to address your use of social media. And so again, normally it used to be contacts between one and another were okay. But new rules apply for social media, and if we can flip to the next slide, AB 992 prohibits members of a legislative body from responding directly to any communication on social media. And so the idea is if one public official comments on anything or reacts, does a thumbs up, does a smiley face, all of that stuff is considered a Brown Act violation. So even though it's not a majority of everybody getting together, AB 992 definitely makes it so that you shouldn't be involved in other people's social media stuff. So if you're someone who posts things on social media, be wary of that if you're looking at or commenting on one of your other commissioners' posts. And that, again, includes commenting, retweeting, liking, disliking, emojis, all that good stuff. Not allowed. There are some permitted individual communications that you are allowed to make. So you're allowed to engage in separate communications outside of the meeting if you are answering questions or providing information to someone. But what you're not supposed to do is you're not supposed to communicate any of the comments or the position of the other members. Again, just your sole role should be answering questions and providing information. And so if you're doing that via email, just something to note is that all business communications are public records, even if they're sent on your personal device. If they're sent related to your role on this commission, that's something that's considered a public record and would be subject to disclosure under the California Public Records Act. So just a caution there if you're someone who writes emails like that. Again, this may not apply to this commission, but we have 16 different boards and commissions here at the city, and so some of these it definitely applies to. All right, so I talked about under the Brown Act, the Brown Act applies to meetings of a majority of the body, but there is also exceptions, and there are things here that are listed on the screen of what is not a meeting. And so I just wanted to point out a couple of those because you will all probably be involved in one of these at a certain time and wonder, is this a Brown Act violation of any kind? So if you're going to a conference that's open to the public that involves a discussion of issues of general interest, that's okay. That's not a Brown Act violation. You know, you can have people getting together to do that sort of thing. The second bullet point, open and publicized community meetings organized by someone other than the local agency. In my mind, I think of that as something like an Arcona meeting or a chamber meeting. You know, that's an open meeting, that's a community meeting, but it just wasn't organized by the city or the local sales tax citizens oversight committee. Third bullet, you can attend an open and noticed meeting of another body or another local agency. You can go to any one of our other boards or commissions or another local agency, and that's not considered a Brown Act violation because, again, they've already noticed it properly under the Brown Act. You can attend a purely social or ceremonial occasion, and I'm thinking something like birthdays, weddings, retirement parties, you know, those sorts of things. If you run into a majority of you, as long as you're not engaging in any sort of communications about what this commission does, that's perfectly fine under the Brown Act. And then the final item, you're allowed to go to a meeting as long as you attend as an observer only, and that is quite literally an observer. You can't make any comments, no snickering, no smiling, any of that kind of stuff. Just be an observer quietly, please. Yes. If you do violate the Brown Act, there are some things that could go wrong, and so I wanted to point those out a little bit. There are potential criminal penalties if you violate the Brown Act, but I do want to point out the underlined words in there of the board has to actually take action, and the member that's going to be getting in trouble for a Brown Act violation has to actually intend on taking that action in violation of the Brown Act. So they're intending to deprive the public of information, or or have reason to know that the public is entitled to that information under the Brown Act. So you could be guilty of a misdemeanor if that happens, so just be aware of that. One of the more common things to do is down there in the civil action and invalidation section. Someone can file an injunction to prevent future Brown Act violations. Any person can bring that civil action. The district attorney can bring that against the city. But something that's more common is to do an action for an invalidation, which is basically saying invalidate any action that you guys made because it's not in substantial compliance with the Brown Act. So that's why we have attorneys here to make sure that we have everything in substantial compliance with the Brown Act the whole way through. I'm going to switch gears from here and go from talking about the Brown Act, which is focused on meetings and public meetings and the right for the public to be involved in our meetings. And I'm going to switch gears and talk for a couple minutes also about the California Public Records Act, kind of on the same sort of discussion topics of open and public and transparent. So the purpose of the California Public Records Act is to make sure that the public's able to monitor what's going on with the functioning of our government. The legislature has declared that the public has the right to access information. It's a fundamental right. And so when we're looking at weighing this, it favors disclosure of everything to the public, and there's very narrowly construed exceptions that we look at. So just something to be aware of, that literally everything that we do on this commission is considered a public record. Again, noting that any emails that are sent, whether they're to staff or whether they're sent individually with you, I wouldn't want you to do that because that could be a potential Brown Act violation. But every email concerning committee business is a public record. It's a public record even if you send it from your personal device. Sometimes I have recommended that people, if you have a Google account or Gmail account or something like that, if you wanted to completely separate your personal account from your local sales tax citizens oversight account, it would be like, instead of creating a Joe Mandel at Gmail account, it would be a lstcoc dot Joe Mandel at Gmail. Sorry, I had to do that real quick. So if you wanted to create a separate one specifically for city business, that is a recommendation sometimes that we do. Again, emails are potentially subject to disclosure. Personal devices may be subject to disclosure as well if there's something that is really concerning that's going on. I'm not overly concerned about this committee. I just want to make sure we're touching all these topics. And so, final note of caution for everybody. Again, a majority of the members should not be getting together to discuss this committee's business. Again, stay focused on no seriatim meetings where one is talking to the other. Please don't do reply to alls on your emails. Be careful with your social media posts. Avoid forwarding emails, and if you have any questions along the way, you're more than welcome to contact me, or anyone in the city attorney's office is happy to help you with Brown Act stuff. So next slide has my contact information on it, and you're welcome to contact me anytime. And again, so we went over Brown Act, we went over California Public Records Act, and that's the end of my presentation tonight. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Are there any comments or questions from the committee?
No.
Are there any public comments on this item? Nope. Thank you for your presentation, Joe. This item was for information only and no action by the committee is required. We will now move on to agenda item 6.3, committee overview. The presentation is by Dennis Kaufman, Assistant City Manager and Chief Financial Officer, on the committee overview for information.
Good evening, Chair Bunnell. I'll be presenting tonight on the following 3 items with Scott Pettingell, who was recently promoted to our Finance Director position. We are happy to be here tonight. This first item is an overview of the committee. And since you were all on the committee last year, this will be a refresher for you, but I also wanted to provide some foundational information for the public about the purpose of the committee. So I'm going to cover the purpose, the current members and terms, an overview of the tax, and the duties of this committee. So the purpose of the committee is to perform an annual review and report to the City Council on the revenues and expenditures of the Measure B sales and use tax. This next slide lists the names of the current committee members and the end of your terms. And at this point, I just want to thank you for volunteering to serve on this committee. Our Measure B sales and use tax is a half-cent tax that was voted in by the voters in November of 2018 to protect Roseville's essential services. And it went into effect on April 1st, 2019, and increased the sales tax rate from 7.25% to 7.75%, which we frequently highlight is still one of the lowest sales and use tax rates in the region and in the state. This next slide provides a breakdown of that sales tax rate by the different jurisdictions that get an allocation of the sales tax, with the state of California getting the largest share there, you can see. In the middle is the city's Bradley Burns sales tax. That 1% is the largest revenue source for the city's general fund. And then you see Measure B there at the bottom, the half-cent that was added in April of 2019. So Measure B is a general sales and use tax. It's not dedicated to a specific purpose, according to the language that was approved by the voters. The other type of tax in California is called a special tax, which has a specific purpose. but Measure B did not have a specific purpose. It's a general fund revenue source, and it's budgeted similar to our property tax revenue and our Bradley Burns sales tax revenue. All of that revenue goes into the general fund to pay for general fund expenditures. And general fund expenditures are budgeted at the discretion of the city council for any program or service. And in the general fund, the largest services are police, fire, parks, recreation, and libraries, those type of services. Expenditures made with general tax revenues are not tracked separately, and I know we've discussed that before. And we may discuss that again, which is one of the challenges for this committee. So we'll be focusing really on the general fund as a whole. And as we've mentioned before, the city develops their budget each year based on the city council's priorities that come out of their strategic plan. It also reflects the intent of Measure B that the voters approved to maintain city service levels. The Measure B tax is called a district tax, district sales and use tax, and it's imposed locally by the city of Roseville under the state of California sales and use tax law. It's generally applied to over-the-counter retail sales within the city, unless the retailer sells cars, boats, or planes. The rules are different for cars, boats, and planes. The auto mall, cars, is the best example of the difference because at the Roseville Auto Mall, if a Roseville resident buys a car, the city gets Measure B sales tax. But if a non-Roseville resident buys a car at the Roseville Auto Mall, we do not get the Measure B sales tax. We do, though, get that Bradley Burns sales tax, no matter where people live when they buy a car at the auto mall. So it's a little bit different in how the local tax applies. The Measure B tax is applied to out-of-state businesses that exceed $500,000. This is largely the Amazons and the large online marketplaces. And then the use tax is applied when someone buys physical goods from outside of California. They don't pay sales tax when they buy them to that other state, and the taxpayer has to pay use tax on those goods. So the duties of this committee is to annually review the revenue receipts and the expenditures of the Measure B sales and use tax, to annually review the status of the programs and services that are funded wholly or partially with proceeds from Measure B, to prepare and present to the City Council an independent report regarding Measure B revenues and expenditures. And the charter that was developed by the City Council says it shall not be within the purview of this committee to direct staff or to recommend specific contracts, projects, services, or service levels, and that these matters remain solely under the authority of the City Council, City Manager, and City staff. So this item is an information-only item. No action is necessary, and I'm available to answer any questions.
So you, you don't keep the revenue separate, so the revenue B sales tax revenue that comes in, it doesn't get marked down separately and spent separately. It's all put into the general revenue fund?
So the revenue itself, we do track in a separate account. So we can show you how much we collected in Measure B revenue. But then it gets combined with our Bradley Burns sales tax, property tax, hotel tax, and other types of general revenues to fund general fund services. So the revenue itself we track separately, but how it's spent gets combined with all of those other general revenues.
Weren't there various things that this revenue was earmarked only to be spent on?
Not earmarked, because the ballot measure was very clear that it's a general tax and can be used on things including police protection, fire suppression, parks, recreation, and libraries, street maintenance, and other general fund services. So it really was wide open in order to be a general tax. We do have in the scorecard a list of a lot of the services that were restored with Measure B or enhanced with Measure B that is provided in the scorecard, kind of as a reminder from the committee to the City Council for some of the things that were funded with Measure B.
Okay.
Are there any other questions or comments from the committee? Are there any other public comments? Thank you for your presentation, Dennis. This item was for information and no action by the committee is required. We will now move on to agenda item 6.4.
All right, thank you. This item is the year-end report for fiscal year 2023-2024. And this agenda item provides hundreds of pages of documentation, but I promise Scott and I are going to do our best to bring it all together in a succinct as possible presentation. And if you could just jot down any questions you have along the way, and we'll take them at the end of the presentation. I'll start us off with an overview, and then I'll hand it over to Scott to go into more details about the budget and the year-end results for last fiscal year. So included in your agenda packet is the exhibits that are listed on this slide. They're virtually the same list of exhibits that you received last year, with one exception, and that is the second bullet from the bottom. We also included a piece of the current fiscal year budget, which is the city manager's message, because it included a table and a little bit of narrative about how the surplus from fiscal year 22-23 was programmed by the city council. And if you'll remember, last year when we met and you provided your report to the city council, we had reported to you how much surplus we had at the end of fiscal year 23, but council had not taken action on how to spend that money. And so we included that in your packet this year so that you'll be able to report back to the council on how the surplus from 23 was allocated and how the surplus from fiscal year 24 was allocated. And so both of those things are in the draft scorecard. So we wanted to provide here a couple slides that just give you some page number references, because we know, I think it was like 955 pages of documentation here. But within the fiscal year 23-24 budget book, and we do have hard copies here if you would like to take one with you, we wanted to provide some page references so that you can find quickly references to the Measure B local sales tax. And we also have a copy of the budget in brief document here on the table as well, if you don't have one of those yet. And so that, hopefully by providing you these page number references, it will help you in developing your report to the council without having to read the whole 600-page document. And then the next slide is for our year-end financial statement audit report, which is called the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, or ACFR. And again, these are page references to different sections of the ACFR where you can find references to Measure B. And I'll just give you an example. That last bullet there, the statistical section, we have a table and a graph that shows how much Bradley Burn sales tax and how much Measure B sales tax has been collected over the last 10 years. So there's some nice trend information on that page 200. So before I turn the presentation over to Scott, I wanted to provide a little bit of context for our fiscal year 23-24 budget. And we generally, when we talk to this committee, talk about the budget first, because the budget for us is the council's prioritization of how to spend general fund revenues. And then after talking about the budget, Scott will talk about how we ended the year. But we just kind of wanted to highlight how this fiscal year 24 budget really focused on fiscal responsibility, which is one of the council's strategic plan goals. The budget aligned with their strategic plan, and it really had us focusing on living within our means, not relying on reserves to balance the budget, and using one-time funding for one-time uses while providing the core services to the community that the community expects. At the same time, in developing this budget, we were starting to have concerns. Concerns about our sales tax revenue because it had started to soften. Coming out of the pandemic, people slowed down their spending on Amazon and started spending on traveling again. And traveling isn't taxable for sales tax. And because interest rates started rising, people were borrowing less on their home equity and slowing down their home improvement projects. And so we saw softening in sales tax revenue for a variety of those reasons. And so that was starting to give us concern as we adopted the budget for last year. And then there was limited room for growth and got us thinking about, are we going to need new sources of revenue, particularly related to capital projects? We have a lot of capital projects in the 5 to 10 year horizon, and everything is getting so much more expensive. And the example that we share often is the fire station down the street was built less than 10 years ago, cost about $7 million. And the new fire station that's opening, I think, this weekend on the other side of town, same design, same kind of floor plan, cost twice as much. And we're seeing that pattern with a lot of our capital expenditures. And so that's a concern that we're continuing to discuss in our budget. And then we have a list there of our Measure B priorities that we've talked about that are included in your scorecard. To maintain our priority service levels, to focus on high priority new services, to build and maintain our stabilization reserve within the general fund, and to pay down our long-term liabilities, particularly our pension and retiree health liabilities, to build future capacity into the budget. So that's the context for the budget, and I'll turn it over to Scott to talk more about the budget and the year-end results in more detail.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to begin by focusing on some of our key revenue highlights for the general fund, particularly the 3 largest revenue sources that are essential to our budget. As we discuss these, I'd like to emphasize that the fiscal year 24 revenue budget was primarily based on the assumption that tax revenues would continue to grow, just at a slower pace compared to previous years, as Dennis mentioned. And this assumption was based on our consultant's latest trends and forecasts at the time we built the budget. Starting with our Bradley Burns sales tax for fiscal year 24, we projected a growth rate of about 2% when comparing to the fiscal year 23 projected revenues. And this 2% translated to an estimated $72.7 million in revenues for fiscal year 24. Next, we have the Measure B local sales tax. And for fiscal year 24, we projected a 1% growth rate compared to the projected revenues for fiscal year 23. And this equated to an estimated $29.8 million in revenue. And moving on to property tax revenues for fiscal year 24, we estimated a 6% increase in property tax revenue, which was projected to reach $70.3 million. And I did want to note here that a portion of that property tax revenue growth is returned to the county under a city annexation tax sharing agreement. So now I wanted to look at our overall breakdown of our general fund revenues, which total about $225 million for fiscal year 24. And this pie chart shows the distribution of those revenues. And as you can see, the majority, or about 76% of our general fund revenues, comes from just 3 sources: Bradley Burns sales tax, Measure B sales tax, and property tax. And the remaining 24% is made up of licenses and permits, the electric franchise fee, and charges for service, as well as some other taxes. So next, I wanted to walk through this multi-year comparison of sales tax revenue, including the Measure B revenue starting in fiscal year 19. And as we mentioned earlier, the fiscal year 24 budget included projections of approximately $72.7 million in Bradley Burns sales tax revenue and $29.8 million in Measure B sales tax revenue. So that totals about $104 million in combined sales tax revenue. And this graph illustrates the trajectory of sales tax revenue over the last several years, providing a view of the trends we've been experiencing. And as you can see, following the pandemic, we've seen a notable slowdown in sales tax revenue growth rates. So now I'll turn to a summary of our general fund operating expenditures by department. And this next chart provides some insight into how our budget is allocated. And as you can see, our general fund operating budget for fiscal year 24 amounted to $214 million. A significant portion of that budget, approximately half, was allocated towards public safety services, which really underscores how closely our budget aligns with the City Council's public safety goals and priorities. Within public safety, the police department accounts for 28% of the general fund budget, while fire department receives 21%. The Parks, Recreation, and Libraries Department is allocated 16% of our general fund, and that remaining portion of the budget is allocated to some other departments such as general government departments, our Development Services Department, and our Public Works Department. And finally, that other category includes items such as transfers to other funds and additional discretionary payment to CalPERS to help address our pension obligations. This next slide presents a revised draft Measure B scorecard chart comparing fiscal year 19 as the baseline to the adopted 24 budget. As shown, most categories ended the year with a green rating, indicating increased funding. However, one exception is the other expenditure category, which has that red rating. And that red rating in the other expenditures category was due to a one-time transfer of $10 million in general funds to the general fund capital reserve that was budgeted for fiscal year 23, but we didn't continue that into fiscal year 24. Moving on to other department expenditures, the police department saw an 8% increase over the prior year. And this increase was primarily due to higher labor costs, as well as rising expenses associated with material service supplies. The fire department experienced a 9% increase in expenditures, and that's primarily due to staffing needs at the new Fire Station 8, as Dennis mentioned, which added additional costs for personnel as well as operations. The Parks, Recreation, and Libraries Department saw a 12% increase in its budget, and that was mainly due to the addition of some new positions, which I'll go into more detail on this next slide. And the other general fund departments experienced a 13% increase, and that was driven by increased labor costs, additional material source supplies, and additional staff, which I'll go into the specifics of those additional positions in a moment. In terms of the general fund overall, expenditures increased slightly compared to fiscal year 23, and this increase includes one-time capital projects and investments to address the city's pension obligations. So a lot to cover on this slide as well. And this slide provides an overview of the staffing levels comparing fiscal year 19 through fiscal year 24. And as you can see, most of the ratings are green, reflecting the staffing levels increased, but the only exception is in the police department, which I'm going to go into more detail in a moment here. Overall, staffing increased by 5% in fiscal year 24, which translated to an additional 36 positions. Information on those new positions is included in the scorecard and also the fiscal year 24 adopted budget document. Most of these positions were added to general fund departments to help maintain service levels in our city that's continuing to grow. I'll now focus more in on that police department red rating. You'll notice a decrease of one position in the PD staffing numbers, and that was due to a promotional reclassification of a police records clerk position to a senior police records clerk position in a prior fiscal year. So to facilitate that type of reclassification, what the city does is they temporarily increase the number of authorized senior police records clerk positions, and once the internal recruitment is finished, and the position is filled, that vacated police records clerk position is then eliminated, and that happened in fiscal year 23. And this adjustment, as kind of explained, is more administrative in nature and really doesn't represent any changes in service levels provided by the police department. The most significant percentage increase in staffing occurred in the all other departments category, which includes departments like Public Affairs, Communications, Finance, and HR. And staffing in these departments increased by 10 positions, or 9%. For Public Affairs and Communications, this increase supported efforts in police community relations, communications outreach, and video broadcasts, as well as enhanced digital outreach for cultural and recruitment branding. In the Finance Department, positions were added to strengthen our internal controls, audits, and to address the growing workload in our payroll division. And in the HR department, we added one position to support the electric and environmental utilities departments with employee performance consultation as well as some succession planning. Staffing in the fire department was increased by 8%, and that was primarily due to staffing needs associated with the opening of the new Fire Station 8. And this included the addition of 3 captains, 3 fire engineers, 3 firefighter paramedics, all of which were necessary in order to staff that new station. The Parks, Recreation, Library departments also saw that 8% staffing increase, and this included the addition of a parks manager to oversee the Parks Division, ensuring the cleanliness and appearance of our city parks. In addition, 3 natural resource workers were added to help manage additional open space acres and trail miles, as well as provide support for maintaining the city's natural resources. The budget also included additional administrative support to assist with capital project management and the financial activities tied with associated with park development. And a new cultural arts supervisor was also included in the parks budget to help leadership at the Maidu Museum and Historical Site, further supporting their cultural and education programming. So now move on. We also wanted to highlight that developing the general fund budget isn't just about estimating our revenues and expenditures. It's also about some strategic processes we do to focus on the future. And throughout this process, we rely on the city's financial policies as our guide in doing that. One of the key aspects of these financial policies is establishment and maintenance of our reserves. These reserves are really essential for helping the city weather economic downturns or other unexpected financial challenges. By building and preserving these reserves, we really ensure that we can remain financially stable in times of uncertainty. Additionally, these financial policies reflect the City Council's ongoing goal to address the pension liability. To meet this objective, we're committed to making additional discretionary payments to CalPERS, as well as contributing to a pension trust fund. On this next slide shows the status of our general fund reserves as outlined in the fiscal year 24 adopted budget. Given the growing cost of city operations, as well as budget augmentations, the adopted budget included a transfer of $2.1 million into our stabilization reserve. And this transfer ensures we meet the City Council's policy target of maintaining 15% of general fund operating expenditures in that reserve. In addition, the budget includes a transfer of $1.3 million into the General Fund Emergency Reserve. And this reserve helps us maintain the council policy target of 10% general fund operating expenditures. The intended use of the stabilization reserve is to address the impact of revenue shortfalls caused by an economic downturn, and while the emergency reserve is set aside to help us cover any urgent expenditures in case of an emergency. So taking proactive steps to address the city's pension liabilities with CalPERS, the City Council has established a strategy aimed at reducing these liabilities, which aligns with our strategic plan goal of remaining fiscally responsible and ensuring long-term financial health. As part of the adopted budget, $4.6 million was allocated for an additional discretionary payment to CalPERS, and these payments are part of our overall strategy to reduce the city's pension liabilities. Based on the most recent actuarial evaluation, the city's overall CalPERS funded status ratio is about 65%. Ideally, we'd be in the ratio of 80 to 95%, and the city's total unfunded liability currently stands at $506 million, which represents the portion of the total pension liability that is not yet funded. By making these additional discretionary payments, the city stands to benefit in several ways, including paying down our unfunded liability, increasing our funded status, as well as reducing future pension costs. So as mentioned earlier, the City Council has established a strategy to address our city's pension liabilities after our general fund reserve targets are met. And to support the strategy, the City Council established a Section 115 pension trust fund. And this Section 115 refers to a provision of the IRS code that allows for the creation of a tax-exempt trust specifically for government purposes. And the pension trust will be used to set aside resources to meet future pension contributions and liabilities, and these resources will be committed to addressing pension obligations. An important feature of this trust is that it can also function as kind of as a rate stabilization fund. And this helps ease any budgetary pressures that might arise from unexpected spikes, the required employer contribution rates associated with the required employer contribution rates from CalPERS. As part of the adopted budget, $4.6 million was transferred into the pension trust, bringing the estimated balance of this fund as of the end of fiscal year 25 to $21 million. Also, I mentioned earlier, the revenue estimates for Measure B in the fiscal year '24 adopted budget was $29.8 million, which accounts for approximately 13% of the $225 million general fund budget. Without Measure B, the city would have faced significant reductions in essential services and programs. And this funding has really been critical to maintaining the level of service that our community expects. Additionally, without Measure B, we wouldn't have been able to establish our stabilization reserve to help mitigate potential budget shortfalls in the short term. And it would also have hindered our ability to make important fiscal health investments, such as paying down our CalPERS pension obligations. So now shifting to our year-end results. Overall, our general fund ended fiscal year '24 with a $15.9 million surplus. And this surplus is made up of two key components: $3.3 million in revenues received over budget and $12.6 million in expenditure savings. Of the $12.6 million expenditure savings, a significant portion comes from the deferment of a planned $4.6 million additional discretionary payment to CalPERS, really as a precautionary measure due to a projected projected sales tax shortfall. The fiscal year '24 budget was impacted by a number of economic factors. Consumer spending was suppressed due to the ongoing effects of inflation and higher interest rates. And additionally, there was that continued shift towards consumer spending on services which are not taxable. While sales tax revenues fell short of our budget estimates, we had anticipated, as we had anticipated during the year, property tax and some other revenues, particularly those related to new development, performed better than we expected, and those stronger than forecast revenues helped offset that shortfall in sales tax. So zooming in on our general fund revenues for fiscal year '24, Bradley Burns sales tax revenues declined, resulting in a sales tax shortfall of approximately $2.6 million, which you'll see at the top there. However, this shortfall was partially offset by our Measure B revenues, which exceeded estimates by about $200,000. While sales tax performed lower than we had projected, Measure B helped mitigate some of that gap, as you can see. As I previously mentioned, the overall decline in sales tax is primarily attributed to the shift in consumer spending. In addition to those ongoing effects of inflation and higher interest rates also had an impact, which did contribute to that slight decrease in sales tax revenues compared to our prior fiscal year. On the positive side, property tax revenues exceeded our expectations, thanks to the rising property values as well as new construction in Roseville. And this trend led to the property tax collections coming in above budget estimates by the end of the fiscal year. Moreover, development activity in the city continued to show an upward trend throughout the fiscal year, and that resulted in some higher than expected revenues from building permits, plan checks, and some engineering inspection fees. And despite the sales tax shortfall, the higher than expected revenues from other categories help offset this decline. And as a result, the general fund ended the fiscal year with a revenue surplus of about $3.3 million, which was approximately 1% of our revenue estimates. On the next slide, we feature or show that's featured in your Measure B scorecard. It tracks the actual sales tax revenues received since fiscal year 19. And as you can see, Measure B revenues showed a steady increase through fiscal year 22, reflecting some strong growth during those years. However, the graph also illustrates that in fiscal year 23 and 24, the growth in Measure B revenues has leveled off. And that reflects some of the broader economic conditions we've been seeing, such as inflation and those shifts in consumer spending patterns. So moving on to focus on those general fund expenditures, this slide provides an overview of the fiscal year 24 year-end results. Overall, general fund departments ended the year on or under budget, which was primarily driven by salary savings associated with vacant positions, as well as savings in the material, services, and supply categories. As you can see, our two largest general fund departments, police and fire, expended a significant portion of the budget, with police spending all their budget at 100% and fire spending about 97% of their budget. Across all departments, approximately 94% of the budgeted expenditures were utilized, resulting in expenditure savings of about $12.6 million. I did want to note here that this figure does take into account encumbrances related to service agreements, which are planned to be expended in the following year, and you'll see that on the bottom portion of this chart. So next, I wanted to go over our general fund year-end spending plan. And this next chart provides an overview of that adopted spending plan. So starting at the top, the City Council appropriated $4 million for parks, recreation, and library projects. And that included about $150,000 for the courts at Gibson Park, which will allow PRL to complete sidewalk improvements along the park frontage area. It also included about $3 million for a west side maintenance yard, which will establish a satellite courtyard on the city's west side. And this facility will provide some storage for equipment and materials, as well as a shop and office space for our operations staff, with the goal of improving efficiency and service delivery in that area of the city. Additionally, the spending plan includes about $600,000 for rehabbing and upgrading youth development facilities. This includes improvements such as flooring, painting, cabinets, HVAC, ramps, roofing, and some new programmable locks. An additional $250,000 was also included to fund the design phase of the Vernon Street Town Square Spray Ground Upgrade Project. Next, $930,000 was approved for replacing police department equipment, and that included $480,000 for body-worn cameras and $450,000 for some other critical equipment such as ballistic vests and shields. Also included in the plan was a $1.5 million transfer to our fleet replacement fund to address a forecasted shortfall in the fiscal year 26 budget. And this will provide for the replacement of vehicles in the police, fire, parks, recreation, libraries, public works, and development services departments, with fire department vehicles being the largest component of that transfer. The spending plan also includes several investments focused on planning for the future, and this includes appropriating $4.6 million for the additional discretionary payment to CalPERS that was approved last year, but deferred due to sales tax revenue concerns, as I mentioned earlier. But we're actually continuing to recommend deferment of this, and that's due to the forecasted shortfall in sales tax during the current year as well. The City Council also approved a transfer of $1.5 million into the Pension Reserve Trust to help mitigate long-term pension liabilities. Now, this transfer brought the balance of the trust from $21 million to about $22.5 million. The City Council also approved a transfer of $1.5 million into the General Fund Capital Reserve to address future capital needs. And this transfer brought the balance of the fund from $3.9 million to about $5.4 million. And lastly, the spending plan included a recommendation to transfer $1.8 million into the Strategic Improvement Fund to provide funding for strategic investments that will eventually lead to general fund revenues. And this transfer brought the forecasted fiscal year 25 balance of the fund from $8.1 million to $9.9 million. And on this, almost done. I know it's long. I have a couple more slides and I'm done. So this next slide. When we met last year, the City Council hadn't approved a spending plan for the fiscal year 23 general fund year-end surplus yet. So we wanted to take this opportunity to provide an overview of that spending plan as well. And as you may recall, we ended the year with $14.3 million of a general fund surplus. And the City Council spending plan included capital projects, including Crimson Ridge Park, Adventure Club facility improvements, public safety technology projects, some parking garage improvements, as well as a corridor streetscape landscaping project. The spending plan also included a one-time assessment payment for the city's general liability program and transfers to the city's strategic improvement fund, pension reserve, trust fund, and litigation reserve fund. And the spending plan also included a few one-time augmentations, such as funding for the fire academy for new staff, personnel record scanning, and a citywide succession planning program. So like last year, including your materials is the Measure B scorecard that we've drafted for your review. And this slide includes a couple snippets from the scorecard. And the draft scorecard was updated to, next slide, please. And the next scorecard was updated to reflect the fiscal year 24 budget. And the format is similar to last year, utilizing that green, yellow, and red scoring method. Like last year, we included a comparison of general fund expenditure budgets and staffing data comparing fiscal year 19, which is the base year, to fiscal year 24. As I mentioned earlier, all scores were green except for the reds and other expenditure spending category and the police department staffing categories mentioned earlier. The draft includes a summary of notable changes in the fiscal year '24 budget and a summary of year-end results. In addition, the scorecard includes a summary of our investments in general fund reserves and a bar chart showing sales tax revenue collected over time. And lastly, the draft includes the city council approved spending plans for the year-end surpluses for fiscal year '24 and '23 that I just went over. So that concludes my long portion of the presentation, and I'll hand it back to Dennis.
All right, thanks, Scott. Nice, that was a lot of information. I just wanted to briefly highlight the two red circles that Scott talked about, because I imagine as you think about and develop your report, you may be highlighting those, and I want to just give those a little bit more context, because when I think about it, and Scott and I have talked a lot about those two red categories, the first one being the police positions, it looks like police positions went down, when in reality, we just temporarily added an extra position while we recruited for an internal recruitment, and then took away that temporary position. So it actually wasn't a decrease, but because we're reporting the data based on what's in the budget, it looks like a decrease. So that's the reason for that red circle. Their staffing ultimately did not go down, but it was, like you said, a temporary administrative change. And then the other one with the other expenditures going down from fiscal year '23 to fiscal year '24, the primary reason for that was in fiscal year '23, we were seeing pretty strong sales tax growth, really strong sales tax growth. And we did not want to invest all of that in ongoing expenses, because we didn't know, the growth was so high, we didn't know how sustainable it was. And so we always have a mantra, if something looks one-time in nature, focus on one-time uses instead of plowing it into ongoing expenses. And so we took 10 million of that excess revenue at that point and put it into that new capital reserve, because we knew we had a lot of capital projects coming up, some of which were underfunded. And we needed to set some money aside. When we got to the '24 budget, we didn't have that excess revenue anymore, because that revenue did start softening. And so we weren't able to make that $10 million transfer to a capital reserve again. So that's why it looks like those other expenditures went down significantly, because we weren't able to make that transfer again. So I hope that's helpful. And as you know, we'll be available to answer questions tonight and throughout the process of you drafting your report if you'd like more details about that. But this information, this item again is for information only. No action is necessary, and we're available to answer any questions that you have.
I have two. Is Measure B approved into perpetuity, or is there an expiration date on it?
Do you say it again?
Is Measure B approved into perpetuity, or is there an expiration date on it?
There is no expiration date.
And then, is police staffing going to stay the same in '25, or is it?
In '25, do you remember?
Right here.
I can't remember. Never mind. Just curiosity.
I think it went up.
I think it did too, but
Yeah,
I don't
it went up by
remember.
3 positions.
Went up by 3 positions.
So that's a way to handle that question if it comes up.
Right. And there are plans to continue expanding staff in the west side of town as more and more houses are being built. And so we'll see more over the next few years as well.
Okay, thank you.
So as far as we know, those positions are officers on patrol and not management positions?
Those three?
Those three.
Yeah, let me look.
I believe one of them was to support all of the body-worn camera footage and all of the process that goes on with all of that data.
Yeah, it was, we included 2 additional police officers and 1 records clerk, and let me get I can look up the details of those, because I don't remember offhand. Bear with me. Oh, there's electric. I wasn't ready for that. City clerk, police.
Services supervisor, is that what it is?
Oh, was that what it was? Fiscal year 20. Okay, so looks like we added an additional position for the police social services unit, and a senior police records clerk. to help with PRA requests, because we're seeing a big increase in the number of PRA requests in the city.
Public Records Act
Oh,
requests.
okay. Oh. Okay. Shall I continue? I have more questions.
Oh, I don't have any. You?
Okay. Let's see, where should I start? First of all, I would like to thank you for the time and effort that you have put into preparing these items for us. I know some of them are standard, and you have to do them just for administrative purposes, but I know the scorecard is specifically for us, so thank you for that. I would also like to commend Parks and Recs for having the foresight and the desire to have someone out there to maintain the parks, especially keeping them clean. It took me a minute to figure out what portering means, but I think that's a really important thing to have. You can pass along that if you will.
We will.
I would also like to commend the police department for continuing to emphasize their efforts in community relations and communication outreach. Now, another question I had was on the annexation tax sharing agreement. I think you answered it for me that this is a new item. It's not a new item?
It is not a new item, yeah. As the city has annexed new areas over the decades, part of the process is for the city and the county to negotiate a tax sharing agreement in order for the city to annex new land. And so over the decades, as the city has annexed new specific plan areas, tax sharing agreements are entered into. And so we have to, the county distributes property tax revenue to us, and then they send us an invoice for their share that we agreed to give back to them. And that money that we give back to them helps them pay for county services that they provide for residents of Roseville. And so I think on that particular slide, I think it was $70 million of property tax revenue that we had budgeted, but we budgeted to pay them back over $11 million of that property tax revenue to fund county services in those areas.
Have there been any new agreements?
Not, the last one was, I believe, 2018 for the Amarusa Ranch specific plan area.
Okay, so this 11.6 million, has that been a pretty steady, consistent amount, or has it gone up and down?
It has only gone up.
It's a percentage of...
It's a percentage of the property tax revenue in those new growth areas. So as property tax goes up in Sierra Vista or Creekview, we get more revenue, but then we have to give more back to the county.
I'm sorry, what is the percentage?
It's different in different areas.
You know where it is?
That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay. Are we anticipating any decreases or at least effects on our programs and services because of what's happening on the federal level?
Well, let's just say this: the city is monitoring the situation very closely. We have our government affairs staff working with all of the city departments to inventory all of our direct federal funding and indirect potential impacts from the federal government. Things that you wouldn't even think of, like cybersecurity services that federal agencies provide to local governments. In that case, it's not even funding; it's services that they provide. So yeah, we're paying very close attention to it. At this point in time, we haven't experienced any direct impacts, but it's top of mind every day for the last few weeks.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
I have one question. You were talking about a $10 million transfer over to the reserve. Did that go to the electric company for the $10 million we borrowed from them?
It did not. It went into a capital reserve for the general fund, for general fund projects. And I'm not sure what 10 million we borrowed. I'm not sure what borrowing you're
Well,
referring
they
to.
borrowed the 10 million, the city borrowed 10 million bucks from their reserve fund to buy that parking garage across the street.
That
That's
was,
what I heard from the city, you know.
The bill, Dennis, you talked about the bill 116 South Grant,
I'm not sure.
but that was not a.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're referring to the building that they purchased, the electric utility bought that with their own money.
Okay.
No loan.
So it's listed in their assets.
That's correct.
And they rent part of it out.
That's correct. Yeah. As of a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it took a while.
To the city for a unit of the police department, and they lease out the portion to the post office.
And of course, you're getting $873,000 a year in rent.
Off the top of my head, I don't know how much we're getting in rent.
But it goes to the
I remember when the
electric
city council
department.
made that deal.
Okay.
They're gonna get 870-some thousand for it, but, yeah.
The rent from that building goes to this electric department.
That's correct.
I do have one more question, if I may. You've mentioned a couple of times between the two of you that the 4.6 million, I believe it was, first payment was in the council's objectives for the surplus at one point, but you deferred it, and then you deferred it again.
Yes.
But the revenues ended up coming in okay. So that, is that 4.6 million still just in surplus?
Want me to take?
Sure.
So yeah, the $4.6 million additional payment was budgeted in fiscal year '24, and sales tax revenues were softening and then declining, and we were worried about how we would end the year. And it's hard to know, in April or May, how our departments are going to end the year with their spending, oftentimes. So we were kind of monitoring it month to month, because I want to make that payment. But I also don't want to end the year upside down. We always aim for a little bit of a surplus. And so we got towards the end of the year and we still weren't sure. And we keep in mind for our sales tax results, there's always a couple month lag. So we don't get June information until August. And so we rely heavily on consultants who all they do is study sales tax information, and they were giving us information that we may be a few $1 million under budget. So my recommendation to the city manager was, let's hold off on it. And so we held off on it. We had that in the surplus when we closed out last fiscal year. We brought it back to the city council and said, we recommend continuing to make this payment. We want to make this payment. But our consultants, again, are telling us our sales tax revenue has declined again this current year. And so our current projection is we may end this year with our Bradley Burns sales tax about $6 million under budget. And so at the moment, I'm recommending that we continue to defer that $4.6 million payment until we have more information this fiscal year. I'm still hoping that we can make the payment by June, but we need to make sure that we have good enough results so that we don't end fiscal year '25 upside down.
But we came in with a 15 million surplus in '24. What number are you comfortable at making that payment? Because it feels like that, like if I was writing a check for my house, I would feel pretty good about making a $4,000 payment if I had 15,000 extra. Where would you be comfortable with that?
Well, as we look at the current year budget, if we're going to be $6 million short on our revenues, I'm going to hold on to that 4.6 million until we get closer to the end of the year and I have more information.
How are expenditures running for 20?
I think we're pretty much on track.
So they're about 100%, like they're not as good as last year, basically.
So from last year's, and I'm just trying to
Yeah,
make sure I
that's okay.
understand where all this ends up. That last year's surplus and occurred, and the council said, here's how we want to spend that money, and that was in that line item.
Correct.
But you didn't spend it.
Correct.
So is that surplus then part of this year's surplus?
So,
The 15 million? I mean, you didn't spend it, and then council has again said, put it into their use of this year's surplus.
Yeah, so we have a balanced budget for this current fiscal year, okay? And so if we end the year $6 million short on revenue, then we'll end 6 million upside down.
And
s-
that 4.5 million that you didn't spend last year will help offset the 6 million?
Correct,
Okay,
correct.
okay.
And I had I had a question, kind of just trying to kind of make sense of this too.
Yeah.
You said there was 6% growth in the property taxes that were received. So when, like, from what I understood, because I've heard a little bit about how Placer County has like annexed certain parts, I believe, of like West Roseville development, and that's how, or I heard something about how like when Costco was announced, there was like a deal that was made where Roseville and Placer County were supposed to receive like some type of extra percentage back in property tax. And I was wondering, when there's like areas of land that get annexed to the city to build more houses, is that the reason why there's continuing to be an increase in property tax growth, or is that mainly just from like appreciation in properties as years go on?
It's a combination of those two things. The property tax revenue goes up because property values are going up. When interest rates are lower and people are selling their homes and then new people are buying those homes, the values of those houses go up to the new market value, and so that increases our revenue. And then as we've annexed new land and developed more to the west, that also increases our property tax revenue. But like I explained earlier with the tax sharing agreements, using that area by the new Costco, for example, we're getting new property tax revenue from those homes, but then we have to give a portion of it back to the county. Could be 15%, could be 25% of that revenue back to the county. We're excited about that new Costco and that retail development because that is going to generate sales tax revenue to help pay for the services to all the homes that are being built out there.
You anticipate a draw from like Antelope, Sacramento type area?
And I heard there was something when a new home is sold in in West Roseville, that there's a certain amount that's like to help develop, like for the parks. Does that go into like the direct budget for the city, or how does that kind of relate to?
I think he's talking about how, say, when West Park decided to build, they promised to build a school and they promised to build a park. How does that affect that budget line?
Well,
We're getting way deeper.
yeah, there are situations where the developers, as part of the development agreement, build a park, for example, for the city, and essentially give it or dedicate it to the city, and it becomes a city park, and then the city maintains it either through the general fund or through a community facilities district or CFD. If the developer builds a school or provides funding to a school, that's outside of the city, between them and the school district.
Okay, so that's not like correlated in any of this, or okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Has the Loomis Costco had any impact on sales tax revenue?
Well, I will quote our consultant from our conversation yesterday, who said it's a little too early to tell. Because so far, because of that 2 or 3 month lag, we only have 1 quarter of data so far. And my initial reaction was, oh, look, they affected us. But there was also a big drop in gas prices during that same quarter. And our Costco sells a lot of gas. And so our sales tax revenue came down during that quarter. But how much of it is related to the drop in gas prices and how much of it might be related to the Loomis store, we don't know yet. But we're paying attention to that.
Because the Loomis store was not approved to provide gas.
That's my understanding.
No, because they had an agreement with the Arco station not to put a gas station at Costco. The Arco station that's across the street.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the big fights, I guess. So
There's not a lot of room there either.
Yeah,
We're way in the
makes
weeds.
Okay. Are there any comments or questions from the committee? All right. Are there any public comments on this item? Thank you for your presentation, Dennis and Scott. This item was for information only, and no action by the committee is required. We will now move on to agenda item 6.5.
Thank you. This final item on our agenda is to determine which two committee members will draft the report to the city council. Last year, the committee's report to the council was in the form of a memo and the scorecard. And we do have a slide here for this. There we go. And the last year's memo, as well as our draft scorecard for this year, are included in your agenda packet. The memo was written by the committee and presented to the city council last year. And the plan is for the committee to present its report to the city council at the April 16th council meeting. And so our recommendation is for you to select one or two committee members to draft your report or memo. After the draft is submitted to city staff, we will distribute the draft in advance of the next committee meeting on March 26th. So our goal would be for you tonight to select one or two committee members to draft the memo to go along with this year's scorecard and to provide it to us in advance of the March 26th meeting so we can include it in the agenda packet. So we would need it more than 72 hours before the March 26th meeting. And then at that meeting, the committee can approve the draft as is or approve friendly amendments to the draft. And then staff will help facilitate that in advance of that April 16th presentation to the city council. We also noted on this slide, which is the slide of our annual budget cycle, that we plan on scheduling these meetings in the future in February and March like we did this year. Our goal for next year is to make it a little bit earlier in February. But that is kind of a summary of the whole budget cycle. And again, the staff recommendation is to approve a motion to select one or two committee members to draft the report or memo after this meeting and before the next meeting on March 26th. And we're available to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Are there any comments or questions from the committee?
Clarification, when does staff need the report for council, right? You need it at least 72 hours in advance at minimum, but much more before that for review.
Yes. So for the council meeting, we'd like to finalize it at the March 26th meeting.
So you need it before that?
That's correct.
Okay.
So we'll need the draft at more than 72 hours before the March 26th committee meeting.
Hopefully more than that, okay.
Yes, exactly.
So like around the 15th or something would be sufficient?
Yes.
Are there any public comments? Okay. Do I have one or more volunteers that are interested in preparing the committee's report to the city council?
I can assist with preparing it, but I won't be here for the council meeting where it's being presented.
I'll be here for the council meeting, but I won't be here on March 26th. Kind of a little bit of a reverse. Anybody else?
Well,
I'm down at the council meeting. I'll be gone that whole week.
well, I can be here to present, and if there is need of any other assistance for the report, I can help with.
Well, it can't be more than two of us, is that correct?
Oh, so you could be able to help with the report.
Many
No, I
people
think you
as want,
volunteered.
I guess.
No,
Then you get a Brown Act violation.
more than two. We don't want to violate the Brown Act.
I can present it.
No, it doesn't matter.
And then we discuss it here at the next meeting.
And how many present? Just whoever we feel like sending?
I thought we were
That's
discussing
correct.
who was
Yeah.
going to
We
volunteer.
had
for
two
the
last
committee.
year.
Could be anybody.
You and me.
For the presentation, it could be as many as you want.
I'm happy to present on April 16th or help present, so however you guys want to work that out. I say that, yeah, my schedule's good.
Okay. So, for here, do I have a motion to appoint committee member? So both you and,
I can help draft the report.
So I think what we're looking for here is we're looking for volunteers that are interested in preparing the report to council. And so am I understanding correctly that committee member Hill and Kitchell are both able to do the preparation of the report?
Yes. Sure.
okay.
Yes.
But then the presentation itself will, it sounds like will be.
I won't be here for the March to share with the committee, but I can do the presentation to the council.
And I can be here in March.
You weren't even on the list. Okay, so I make a motion that committee member Kitchell, and Vice Chair Hill prepare the report.
Second.
Okay, let's do a roll call vote on that, please.
Okay, Committee Member Betancourt,
4.
Chair Brunel,
For,
I'm sorry,
or 5?
Just aye, yes,
yes,
no,
yes.
whatever, yeah.
Vice Chair Hill,
Yes.
Member Kitchell,
Yes.
and Committee Member Spite.
Yes.
Sorry. The motion passed.
And then do we, at
Thank
this
you.
point, do we also discuss who's going to give the presentation?
We don't need a, if there is going to be at least 2 of you or 1 or 2 of you that are going to present, the item that we have before us is approving a motion to prepare the report only, and so I don't want to make a formal action to actually go present, but certainly at the next meeting, we can talk about who would be available to present at that city council meeting.
Okay.
Okay. So the motion passed. Can I have a motion for adjournment? Motion by committee member,
Who's making a motion to adjourn? Somebody,
Me, Hill.
okay, seconded by committee member Bennell to adjourn the meeting.
Great.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Time
26.
27.
7:27.
thank you, everybody.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.